Welcome everybody to Developing the Case for Support. We've got a lot of information to cover today. It's quite a detailed process, so kind of hang into your seats there. We may go over about 5 or 10 minutes, and I hope you'll be able to stay with us. This obviously will shorten the amount of time we have for question and answers, but we will cover all questions. If not in the webinar itself, then in writing when we send you the materials in the next couple of days. So our agenda for today is to really dive deeply into the case for support. What is it? What are the costs and the benefits of doing it? How to actually develop the case for support. What the end result that you're looking for, which is to demonstrate that you are a high-performance, high-impact organization. We're going to use the Case for Support Evaluator, something that we've developed here at Metasoft, as a framework for today's webinar, and also to be able to give you a tool that you can then use both for developing your case for support and for evaluating if you have one existing, or year-to-year evaluating your case for support so that it's always current. We'll dig into some of the aspects of that case, the assessment of need, the innovation and scalability outcomes, and then talk about making sure that your materials are consistent with your case for support. So what is the case for support? The case for support is a clear articulation of your organization's purpose, its strategies, and its goals, who you are, who you're serving, why you're serving them, and then what you're doing for them is really what you're trying to answer overall in this process. You want to ask yourself the really, really tough questions that a foundation would ask you to ultimately come to the answer of why should your organization receive support. Foundations are looking to make social change. That's the reason why they set themselves up, was to actually make change in our communities. And what they're doing when they give you a grant is they're investing in you to make the change that they wish to see. So you really need to show them that your organization's method of change, your organization's approach to the kinds of changes that they're wanting to see, or in the areas they're wanting to see change, is where they should invest in order for that issue to be resolved or mitigated in some way. It really is the sine qua non, which is Latin for without this, nothing. You really cannot move forward with your fundraising without going through this process, at least not to create really strategic, powerful, effective fundraising without going through this process. And we'll go into the reasons why that will be. So it's not something that you're doing. The results and document that you create from it is not something that you're going to actually send out to anybody. It's an internal document, but that does not, however, mean it isn't an extremely important process. I think the best metaphor for it, or the likeness for it, is it's similar to a business plan for a not-for-profit organization, but it's not a business plan. In fact, I would encourage you to do both a case for support and a business plan, and the distinction between the two really is the second bullet in here, which is why should your organization receive support. That is the reason to do a case for support, whereas a business plan is more, even though it's also got your purpose and your strategies and your goals, it's more of an action plan in terms of how you're going to actually go about running your organization, if you will. So that's the distinction between the two of them. It's not a single sentence like a positioning statement or a value proposition. Though having done a case for support, you can then come to a positioning statement or a slogan or some kind of value proposition statement that may be derived for it. So let's just be really clear that the case for support is an entire process that you take your organization through, as well as a document, quite a lengthy document, that you are then have at the end of the process. So many organizations we find, talking to not-for-profits across North America, that many organizations shy away from doing case for support, and mainly because they feel that there are more costs to doing the case than there are benefits. So I thought it would be worth our while to spend a moment to just talk about what the costs and the benefits are. Time and resources is probably the heaviest cost to doing the case for support. It requires the time of your staff, it requires the time of your board, it requires somebody to facilitate the process, whether you hire somebody from the outside, which might in fact cost you money to do that, or you have somebody in the organization who has to facilitate that process. And often it is the development director or the fundraiser, and so they are so under pressure to be generating contributed income that they feel they can't take the time aside from that to actually pursue the case for support. And the resources, the costs, human resources and so on that it takes may also seem quite daunting to the individual development director or to the organization itself. Also, many people within the organization resist the case for support process because they feel they're not a fundraiser, and so why should they have to get involved in creating the information needed to actually raise money? And this, I feel, is just very short-sighted, and that it's the job of the person facilitating the case for support to convince people of why it's worth their time, why it's pivotal to the organization, that they take the time out of their own focused responsibilities into supporting this. Fundraising really is a whole organization process, and I think that that's a message that really needs to be taken not only to the board, but also to the staff. So let's talk about the benefits, because these two are really the only costs to it. And though it may seem like they're overwhelming, I think you'll see by the time we're done today that the benefits, in fact, are greater. The case for support is a catalyst for the whole fundraising process. It undergirds it and enables the process all the way through to donations and so forth. It gives the organization, and the whole organization, not just the development department, the whole organization, an opportunity for critical analysis of what they're doing and who they're serving and how they're doing it. It also gives the organization an opportunity to be really strategic and apply strategic thinking to their whole program, as well as to their fundraising. Case for support process gives you an opportunity to engage with all stakeholders. We said in terms of the cost that there's a lot of stakeholders that may be resistant to this engagement, but it's such a fundamental part of ensuring that the whole organization is moving in the right direction, not only from a fundraising perspective, but also from a perspective of programming and seeing how it all fits into the mission and the vision of the organization. It strengthens people's sense of purpose. I've seen it galvanize boards, for instance, in terms of their own fundraising. It increases people's understanding overall about what it is that the organization is doing. And with that understanding and purpose, they can actually turn your stakeholders into fundraisers in the very sense that they're out and about in the community and are therefore presented knowingly or unknowingly with many opportunities to put forth the case for the organization and increase your fundraising, the funds you generate through your campaigns by this sort of hidden method of fundraising. It increases your efficiency because you've gathered together in one place all of the information, all of the data that's needed to support your fundraising. Your fundraising actually becomes much more efficient. So when you go to write the individual fundraising letter, you can just cut and paste from the case for support. When you need to develop a slogan or a positioning statement, your case for support will give you those. When you need to do searches for potential foundations, you've got all the keywords for your search in your case for support document. You've got everything you need to be able to write your proposals in your document, so forth. So, in fact, having taken the time up front to go through the case for support process, your fundraising from there on is very, very efficient and more effective as well, because you've got a strategic, clear, and practical way of presenting the information that's needed. Your presentations become more powerful when you're sourcing it out of all the data and information that's gathered in your case for support, so you can see it all against each other and with each other. So your presentations become more powerful because they have this oversight to your whole organization. And also, it supports the proposition that you are always making, the demonstration you're always making, that you're a high-functioning, high-impact organization. Don't worry if you can't see all the words in the list of benefits here. When we send you the presentation, we'll send it to you with those actually just in bullet points. So the benefits far, far, far outweigh the costs of doing the case for support, and I hope that this information that we've given you in terms of what a case can do, you can use to actually take this and help overcome your own resistance, your board's resistance, and your staff resistance to participating in the case for support process. So how to develop a case for support. As I said before, the overarching objective is to demonstrate that you are a high-performing, high-impact organization. So that's going to be filtered throughout the whole process, and also what you want, the sort of the leave behind feeling after somebody has read through your case after you read through your case for support. Set deadlines for the process. It's one of those things, because of the time it takes away from what people feel is the core of their positions or jobs, it can drag out for many weeks or months. My recommendation to you is to do it in a compacted time. I find it more effective and powerful for the organization. You can think about doing things such as retreats for the board or days for the staff to work on aspects of it, and so on. But very much recommend that you set deadlines right from the get-go of the various steps within the case for support, as well as the date when it will be completed. The first step is to gather and update all the existing information that you have, such as the mission statement, vision, and so forth. And then you need to do the research and write the new materials, aspects of the case for support that you may not have done in the past. Engaging staff, board, and other stakeholders, I think we've talked about a bit here, and that's right from the get-go in terms of convincing them to spend the time on the case for support, as well as actually getting them involved in various aspects of this. It really can make a huge difference to the whole organization. People become so purposeful in what they're doing. They can see how what they do in the programming area, what they do in the administrative area, what they do as a board member, what they do as a volunteer. They can see how all of that comes together for solving the problem that the organization exists to solve, and then seeing how that actually the results that actually has, and the people who are willing to invest and support, it can create a tremendously positive atmosphere within the organization, having gone through that process together. And then the last step in the case for support process is to ensure that all of your materials, not just your fundraising actually, but all of your materials are consistent with the case for support. So what is a high performance? Since this is what we're trying to demonstrate overall with the case for support process is that you are a high-performing, high-impact organization. What is a high-performing, high-impact organization? High-performing organizations clearly have the capacity to fulfill their mission. They've stated it's something that they're trying to achieve in our communities, and they have what it takes in terms of people and resources and money and ideas and models and experience in order to achieve what it is that they've set out to do. They have a proven track record. This just goes to speaking to what it is that foundations are looking for when you look at the top 4 indicators to them of organizations they want to support. Past performance is number 2 reason they want to look at this. Compare favorably against other organizations addressing similar issues. They measure the results of their programs and use these measurements as critical feedback to guide and improve their organization at all levels. This is especially true in the area of program implementation. So basically, foundations want to know, are you an efficient and effective organization in terms of your approach? Because what they want to see is that you can leverage the grant dollars that they give you into real change, and that you are the best group of people you're the best approach to put their money towards in order to make the kind of social change that they want to make. Impact. A compelling need within the community for your organization or a gap in service is the foundation of the whole area of impact, and we'll go into it more once we get into the actual details of today's slides. Clear benefits generated by the organization and its programs. If you have a new approach to a problem, if there's a fresh way that you're addressing an issue, then make that front and center. Are the programs scalable? Can they be replicated in other parts of the region or state or province? Or other parts of the country, or even internationally? Can you generalize and expand them for greater impact of the original dollars given? Can the organization act as a model? Are you sharing best practices, information about how you're going about doing what you're doing? Do you have partnerships? Is there an effective way to codify and distribute the methods that you are doing? These are parts of the kind of impact that foundations are looking for in not-for-profit organizations. So last time we looked at Hope Consulting's 2011 study of over 700 foundations as well as 20 existing reports and studies. And it showed that the top 4 indicators that foundations look at was the approach and the impact, past performance, the finances, and then the cause. And here I just wanted to show you the sort of the granular or the minutia within which they are looking in each of these areas. This in itself, and I won't go into details with this. You have it you'll have it in your materials. But what I wanted to mention by showing this to you is that you could actually utilize this outline of what it is in each of these areas that foundations are looking at. You could utilize this as an outline for what you would do in a case for support. Each of these lines could in fact become a headline in a section of your case for support because this is the information that you're needing to generate in order to make powerful presentations. And foundations are feeling a lack of the type of information. In the same study, they were asked what is the most important information to you, and they were also asked where do you feel that you're not receiving the right enough information. And as you can see, the approach and the expected impact is their number 1 in terms of importance, but almost almost the top one in terms of a lack of information. Past performance, again, this was number 2 in the indicators that they were looking for in terms of their decision, and it again is a source of information they feel is not being met by not-for-profit organizations. So please take note of this and make those kinds of presentations in your proposals. It will certainly help you stand out from the crowd. So we ourselves have developed an outline for the case for support. We were, of course, very happy to see the HOPE report and see how closely our outline matched what we were seeing in terms of what foundations. This was confirming of the kinds of discussions that we've been having with not-for-profits for a number of years, and the ones that we have every day. So we developed a case for support evaluator, which I'm going to use now and go over with you. In developing a case for support, you would use each section as a headline, and then you would write material for each of these sections. As an evaluator, after you finish the case for support, you would then go back and utilize the same outline to then see how well you did, how strong was each of these sections, and we've given you some indications of what should be in those sections in order to see, to judge how well you did with that particular aspect of things. At the end of the webinar, we will be sending you materials in the next 24 to 48 hours, and in that we will include an evaluator separately so that you are able to use it in both of these ways. So the case for support. So the executive summary obviously is something that you would do after you've completed the case for support. And you want to make sure that all the key points are of the entire case are in this 1 or 2 pages, and that it's current and comprehensive. It needs to be a succinct, a distillation of the entire document, and both coherent and compelling. The mission statement or vision statement, or one of each, need to be fairly thorough descriptions. I've been seeing a trend in the last few years of people, again, turning their mission and vision statements into a slogan or one-line positioning statement. And while this can be powerful in terms of materials you might produce, there is a very important place in longer material in your own internal documents for a full-fledged mission statement that does a full description of who you are as an organization, what your structure is, what your key activities, the scope and the scale of your activities as well, rather than a marketing slogan. It's an important exercise to go through and get agreement on from everybody, so I just wanted to encourage you to do that. The history of the organization, including its past achievements and any strategic plans you may have for the future. Evidence of support. Here, basically what you're trying to prove or present that your organization is well received by the community, that the community values it, and that the populations that you are trying to serve also value what it is that you're doing. This is basically what you want to see in evidence of support. One of the important factors is your board contributing financially? And I know that boards can be, governance. They can be actually hands-on and working boards where they're actually helping you with services from their own expertise. But it's also important that the foundations find it important that the board is contributing financially as well, to whatever degree that might be. To be able to say that you have 100% board support financially is very, very important, even if that's a small amount from each board member. Who else do you receive support from? Other foundations, corporations, individuals? What's the diversity of your actual revenue? Do you have any earned revenue streams where you may be charging a fee or selling a product? Government support. They want to see all of that information. What is your stewardship and your policies and practices around the financial support that you receive? And what do you, and who is supporting you non-financially? Maybe it's media supporting you with articles and so on. Perhaps it's the partnerships you formed. You know, from any stakeholder that is connected to your organization, if you have any references, testimonials, you want to make sure that they're in the case for support. You may not use them, but you may find that you're pulling quotes or whole letters from them in some instances where they're actually called for. The next and very important area is the assessment of need. This is the whole foundation of your case for support. It's the whole foundation, if you will, of your entire organization and why it exists. You have, as an organization, at some point in your history, recognized a problem in the community, and that problem is ongoing. You are going to state what that problem is, or what the gap in, maybe what you are doing, what you recognize is a gap in service to particular populations, and the impact that that gap in service has to the greater community. You're going to state this problem or this gap in service, back it with statistics, show trends of what would happen if those statistics, if those problems were not answered, and that becomes your statement of need. You need to also show what would happen if there was no intervention in the problem. So that's basically what you are as an organization, is an intervention in an issue within our communities or an issue with a particular aspect of our community. So this is a great way to go about, if you're having trouble coming to what your case for support is, this is a great way of going about figuring that out, is what would happen, what would the trend be, what would the consequences be if there was no intervention in this particular problem. And you want to say, you know, what's the scope of it? Is it a local problem or gap? Is it a regional, national? And what's the scale of it? How many people are affected by this? Again, you want to support this with statistics. Is this problem continuing or growing over time? So one of the questions that I think comes to mind for any organization that at first look seems to be supporting a small group of people or solving a problem for a small number of people is, well, you know, what we hear is people will say, well, you know, nobody cares because we're only serving 20, 30, 50 people a year, and that's not a great enough scale to be of interest to foundations. So I think we need to talk about this sort of pink elephant in the room and say that the way to address this, if you are only serving a small population, is to talk about the depth of that problem for that, that population, no matter how small. What comes to mind when I think of an example is a teen pregnancy and substance abuse halfway house that I was talking to a number of months ago, and they can only have about 20 young women in their center at a time because of the whole process of, you know, pregnancy and the amount of months it takes. This will be for a year. They will only help 20, 30 young women. And the way to present a statement of need for an organization like that is to talk about the depth of the impact of what is occurring for the problem for those 20, to evoke empathy, to talk about the extent of the problem and how it'll impact all the way through the line. The fact that you know, teen pregnancies become something that becomes systemic within certain families if there's no intervention in that problem. What happens when a pregnant woman has a substance abuse issue, and what that does to the child, and how will that impact the community and that child down the line. So I think you can see what I mean when I'm talking about explaining the depth, even if the scale or the scope is not large. We wanted to give you an example, and a fairly simple one, of an assessment of need. Again, I'm not going to read it for you here. It'll be in your documents, and you can read it yourself. What I wanted to point out here, this is an organization that is asking for funds to create financial aid for parents with children who have been born with significant hearing problems. And the aid is for to be able to have the surgery for an implant, and or to have the education that's needed for the child once they've received this implant. So here's the statement of need for that. I wanted to point out that in here they're going to give the statistics that show that the need for financial aid is there. They're also talking about here a very clear statement of what the financial problem is, the fact that children with hearing loss are 2 to 3 times a higher cost in terms of raising children with that. Then they talk about what the potential of the intervention is. And that is an early intervention where if this intervention can occur early in the child's life, the difference that it can make for that child and for that family, both financially and from ability to language and so forth, is critical. We then went on and actually created a graph to demonstrate this as well. And it's a simple graph, but I think it shows very clearly what the distinction is between raising a child who has full hearing, raising a child who has a hearing problem. And then if there is an intervention, how that reduces the problem quite significantly. And so this is a fairly good example, and a very simple example of a statement of need that we just wanted to give you. And it seems to be stuck. Maybe I can get some technical help here. Oh, I got it. Sorry about that. There we go. So the next area to talk about in the case for support is the programs and how you present the programs. So you want a full description of the program in terms of who it's for, what the problem is, why this group of people need help, or this situation needs help, and then what it is that you're doing. The what is, in fact, the program itself. I just wanted to go over a very important distinction in terms of presenting the program, and that is to present both the features of it as well as the benefits of those features. In other words, to not just state a list of characteristics of the program where you say, state what it is that you do. That is important to do, but it's also important to, within that, to also state clearly within that description also what the benefits are of the program. So this is an example of this distinction I'm trying to make for you. Instead of just saying something like, our organization, for example, offers daycare service. Offering daycare service is a feature or a characteristic. Here's how to state the same feature, but in a benefit statement that I think you'll see is much more powerful. And what you would say here in this example would be, our organization is providing much needed professional care for children of parents in our community who must both work in order to sustain their families. You can see how the, just saying we're going to provide daycare and saying how that daycare is going to help somebody can make a much more powerful description. So I want to encourage you to make a list of all the characteristics of the programs that you're going to describe, and then translate those into benefit type statements as your way of describing the program itself. It's important also in the program description to relate the program back to the mission of the organization and how it connects to that, to relate it, of course, very clearly to your statement of need, either the one of the organization overall or a defined statement of need for a specific program that you're writing about, what the goals and the measurable outcomes of that program will be. We'll talk a little bit more about outcomes in just a minute. And then once you've written everything, details about the program itself and all the programs that your organization has, you want to then prioritize those programs in terms of their value to the organization. And when I say value to the organization, I'm talking about how well do they help you fulfill the mission of your organization. They will probably be 1, 2, maybe 5 programs that you have in your whole, kitty of programs that are the most on target as far as your mission goes, or the most on target in terms of solving a specific problem. Also, you want to prioritize them in terms of fundability, which ones are best for you to go to foundations or other types of funders for, and how fundable are they? And this might be part of your determination as far as what you go forward with to foundations for fundraising. Innovation and scalability is the next area that I want to talk about. And this is really where a lot of foundations look to demonstrate impact. A lot of what we're working on are age-old problems of our community, just our situation as beings on this planet. And so what the foundations are looking for is some unique and fresh approach to these problems that will mitigate them in a new way. And so the uniqueness of what you're offering can be the uniqueness of the program itself. It could be the way that you're approaching the problem. It could be the way that you're delivering or the outcomes and the measurement of those outcomes, the use of technology or the use of particular skills in a new way that is what makes the program or what you're asking for funds for innovative. It can also, it's also important to talk about how your organization is structured to be able to make these kinds of changes, to be able to have this type of innovation. And can you, in fact, act as a model? So this is where innovation and scalability kind of come together, both the fact that you're doing something in a fresh way, and then the next step is, are you a model? Can what you're doing be replicated by other organizations? And are you, in fact, actively trying to bring this fresh idea, this new approach out into the world, and so that it can actually help other organizations in your community or in your region, your state, or across the country? Scalability also goes to increased reach, with incremental increase in cost. So you want to be able to show, as part of scalability, how the program can be generalized or expanded, how what you're doing can be leveraged for greater impact, which is ultimately what it is that the that the foundations are looking for. And in that generalizing expansion, what kinds of resources, including the cost, would be necessary for the kind of increased impact that you're looking for, and how the two things relate to each other. I mentioned the statistics within here, within the Evaluator, not because it's an actual section within your case for support, but just to, again, emphasize that it's very important that you're using statistics for support and numerical indications of what it is that is happening within your programs. So here's a wonderful example. CharityWater.org. I strongly recommend that you go on and look at their site. They are an excellent organization in terms of presenting all of the aspects of what we've talked about today. So I thought it would be great to look at them as an example. So here is their statement of need. Why water? And you almost don't have to read the paragraph on the left. You can just look at the picture and get why water, is an important issue. When you see the diseases that they're listing on the top there, you see a human being's hands with filthy water, knowing that this person is going to be actually drinking this. It pulls on the heartstrings right away, and it's very, very important. At the same time, though, even knowing that that's happening, they're not, they're not shy to very clearly state what the problem is, and that is that a lack of clean water, more than wars, more than all forms of violence, is the #1 killer of human beings, and that 90% of the 30,000 deaths that occur every week from unsafe water, especially to children, are absolutely preventable. In terms of innovation, this is the same organization, Charity Water. They have come up with what they're calling a bold new idea. But I think everybody on this line, if you've spent any time being a fundraiser at all, knows that we've all spent years hitting our head against that misconception in the community that too much money is spent on administration and not enough is spent on programs itself. And they've just very powerfully stepped forward and said, okay, we can't seem to convince you to understand the workings of a not-for-profit organization, and that something has to be spent on administration in order to actually create the programs that everybody wants to support. And so, okay, we're going to get people to support the administration quite separate from the projects themselves, and 100% of public donations are going to go to the projects. They're not, in fact, doing anything new. We all partition our resources, allocate our resources in some way, and what they're doing, though, is they're making it a statement, and they're making a promise around how they're going to, in fact, allocate the donations. And they're presenting this as an innovation. And it's a powerful one. It's a powerful communication innovation. It's a powerful model that they are presenting to the public in terms of the donation. It's also powerful to the people who are supporting them from the point of view of the administrative support, and they're going to foundations for that. That's their main focus on foundation support, is for the administration. And it's been working really, really well for them. They set out in their first year or two to raise about $4 million, and they've raised $40 million. In that time period, and I think it's because of this model that they've presented here. So the outcomes measurement is the next section of the case of support we want to talk about today. Outcomes, the definition, the clear understanding of how your organization's programs are going to impact the population and the community that you are working with. So I just wanted to make a distinction here in definition. Often what we see from our clients, from our members, in terms of what they think are outcomes are not outcomes, they are outputs. An output is basically what you have produced. In other words, goods, services, the number of people who have come to your programs, that kind of anecdotal information in terms of what's been created from the programs that you have been, what you have created in terms of how you want to go about solving the particular problem or filling the gap that you're working on. Whereas outcomes are the effect of those programs. How have those programs benefited people? How has the program's existence for that population, the participation in the program that you have created, how has that been significant for the participants of that? That's what the outcome is, and I hope you can see the difference between outcome and output. And so with the outcomes, with the benefits, the effects of what you have been, the services that you have been offering, what you want to do here is support that again with empirical data to substantiate the claims that you are making about the impact of your programs in a clear and measurable, so what it is clear and measurable evidence of the change that your programs have created. And one of the major reasons why foundations and other groups have been increasingly interested in this is because they want to see what methodology is in fact effective on a particular program, makes real change, and then is that replicatable? If the results, if the approach is having the kind of change it has, then others could use it to solve the same problem in other areas or transfer the methodology to other sectors. So once you kind of understand what it is that foundations are going for here, why they're so interested in outcomes, I think you can see why you want to make that central to how you actually do programs. Of course, it's important for us as, for you as a not-for-profit organization as well, because you will also need to be measuring how effective are the programs that you're having in your actual fulfillment of your mission, which is to solve a specific problem or fill a particular gap in service. So what those outcome measurements are going to be particular to your program, to your sector. You almost want to look at the statement of need as this is the problem, and then your program is, this is our hypothesis on how that problem can be solved. Oh, okay, then here's the data from observing how our programs affected the populations and the communities we were working with. Here's what we saw, and so our hypothesis, our solution is more or less effective in these various ways. That's how you kind of come to the area of outcomes. And then what would be the markers for you? If this was an experiment, if you saw this was the problem, and then you had a hypothesis which was your programs, what would be the indicators in observing those programs' implementation? These become the things that you're actually measuring in your outcomes. So what is that for you? What is that for your programs? What is that for your sector in terms of markers? Maybe it's an increase in the abilities of your population that you're serving, or a decrease in the problem in terms of the frequency of it or the intensity of it. Maybe it's an increase in productivity or quality of life, or education levels, and so forth. As I say, if you approach it almost as though your programs and your whole process is an experiment, I think you'll come to an understanding of what it is that you need to be measuring in order to see how well, in order to understand how well it is affecting the people that you're trying to, or the populations that you're trying to serve. So We will be digging much more into this in our next webinar, which is called Increasing Your Fundraising, I think, by Increasing Foundation Grants by Demonstrating the Value of Your Programs. Fanny's just trying to help me remember the name of that very long title. What it mainly is going to be focused on is outcomes. So just so you know. So just a couple of notes here that I wanted to mention in our Case for Support Evaluator about outcomes is that, where we're trying to go with it in terms of presenting it to the foundation is how are you leveraging grant dollars, how are you leveraging experience and knowledge for change, and what is that change? They want to see that measurement, that focus on results being intrinsic to your program. So it's not just something you do to report to a foundation or a government group, which is kind of an annoyance to you. It's actually integral to how you go about implementing your programs, and then understanding your organization's impact, and then using that understanding to actually drive how you what you program and how you implement that programming. We've talked about empirical versus anecdotal evidence, as well as that the outcome should specify what the successes have been. Wanted to mention, there's a line at the bottom of this slide that just mentions resources. That if the expertise does not exist within your organization to do this kind of empirical data measurement and substantiation of your outcomes, that your local academic institutions are a good resource for you to go to. There either is a study that has been done on programs similar to yours whose outcome measurements you could then use in terms and refer them to your own programming. The evidence that if you're doing evidence-based programming, obviously you're going to be able to take your information from that. As well, if you want to in the future have data that comes out of your actual programs in your community, then my suggestion to you is to go to a local academic, the psychology department, social work department. If your area you're working with animals, go to the animal husbandry or veterinarian colleges locally, and see if there's an academic there who would be interested in utilizing your programs as a study for them. It gives you the ability to get the kind of data you need, and it gives them the information that they need to perhaps publish papers and articles. So it's a win-win for everybody involved. I wanted to go back to the charity water example and just show you a little bit about some of the points that I'm making here, some of the distinctions I'm making here. In this first slide, which comes out of their annual report, which they, by the way, I have posted on their website as well. This first bit of information that you see here, this is outputs. So they're mentioning that for 4 years, they've gone to 17 countries in terms of projects. This has created 3,811 projects, which means that over 1.7 million people have drinking water. So this is often what we see is that organizations stop at this kind of outcome presentation. But this is not an outcome. This is an output. This is what they've created they've produced, if you will, from their grants, from the resources that they have as an organization. They further go on to talk about the return on investment. Return on investment kinds of analysis are still output, but they are in a transitionary place between output and outcome. Here, for example, in the general public donations, what they talk about in terms of the return on investment is $5,000 donation, public donation, creates one water project which creates 250, which provides water for 250 people. Again, as you can see now that you're clear on what the difference between an outcome and an output is, you can see that this is in fact what's been produced as opposed to how that production has affected. The leveraging, as I say, which is their next one, which is they're talking about what the people who give for the administrative costs of the organization, same $5,000, but this $5,000 now goes to administration. They're able to take that and leverage it into $25,000 in money raised. This, as I said, is a kind of a transitionary place between output and outcome, because the effect of, it's not only what's produced, but it's also the effect of that on the organization based on what it is that they're saying is the innovation, which is their ability to divide between public monies and administrative donations. So similar numbers, but because of what the focus is in terms of the actual project and the organization itself, this is why I'm saying that this is a transition place between outputs and outcomes. Where they really start to get into the outcomes is when they start to ride in this manner. And even here, even though I think so highly of Charity Water as an organization and their presentation of their case for support in their website, for example, even in this, they're still mostly in these listings of what happens when you get a water in your village. They're still mostly talking in terms of outputs, what is produced from them, and it isn't really, except for in number 4 and 5 and 6 points here where they're talking about outputs. I want to hark back to a discussion we had earlier about the difference between a feature and a benefit. The feature is the characteristics. The benefit is what that characteristic does for someone. So outputs and outcomes are almost a similar type of distinction. So in the first one here, they say that once there's water in a village, then the 3-hour walk that would normally happen for, in a village, somebody would have to walk for 3 hours to get water, is changed into a 15-minute walk, which you could say, well, that's an output, right? But an outcome, I should say. But it's output in the sense that there's no discussion of what the reduction of time that it takes to go and get water does for that person or for that community. So again, I'm hoping that this example that I'm giving you is going to clarify that distinction. Number 4, however, is a stronger outcome presentation. You use the extra time and use water source to start a vegetable garden and feed your family. You sell the extra food at the market. So here's an outcome. An outcome is the ability, you have more time, you have the ability to grow vegetables and feed your family. So we're starting to see outcomes happening here. They go further and present outcomes more strongly here, where they talk about clean water, reducing diarrhea illness by 21%, and sanitation by 37%, and so forth. So this reduction of the problems that exist within this community is a clear outcome of the water source, as well as they mention in this paragraph, the actual teaching and hygienic practices that usually go along when they're doing a water project in a community. They further go and talk about what the economic outcome potential is for a water project, and this is a very powerful statement of potential outcomes from something that may not seem very related. And even though they don't go into great depth about how that's created, they do give one very powerful example, which is that even after a natural disaster, if there is water infrastructure in place, there is a great reduction in disease among the survivors. not a statistically necessarily supported outcome, but a very powerful one, and I think you'll agree that it definitely speaks very strongly for the potential of water projects as what they're trying to do. So the next area is capacity, and this really overall is the ability to present your organization in such a way that the person listening to or reading your presentation says, this organization understands the issues, they know how to solve them, and they have what it takes to get the job done. So you want to do that by showing that the resources are the right, the resources in terms of funds and people and technology and networks and all of that are the right ones to fit with the correct programs. That you are qualified either through the knowledge on your board or expertise of your staff or history or approach or so forth. Your organization is qualified, and if it's uniquely qualified within the community to actually implement the programs and fulfill the mission that you are fulfilling. And you want to differentiate yourself from other organizations offering similar programs. Why should the foundation fund you to solve this specific program in our communities? And that your model, how you're approaching this, is actually sustainable. If you do have any partnerships or affiliations of any kind, it's important to mention these because they too have an impact. It means that any dollars that are given to you not only help your organization, but help beyond your own four walls. And then, of course, the donations, what kinds of gifts you're receiving, what the sources of the various gifts that you're receiving on the contributed side, who your staff is, particularly your senior staff of the organization, the whole organization chart, bios of each of your senior staff, your board members, what your governance structure is. Do you have volunteers? What kinds of hours do the volunteers contribute to overall to the organization? Budgets. Here, I mean, I think everybody knows how to do a budget and you want to make sure you do a budget both for the overall organization plus budgets for individual programs themselves, and a statement of some kind about the fiscal health of your organization and plans that you have around that. Contact information for your organization should be included in this as well. So in completing the case for support, you want to make sure that all of your materials support are consistent with your case for support. And we wanted to give you the example of the website. And the reason that we're giving this example is because after a foundation has read your application, the next thing they're going to do in terms of finding out information about you is to go and look on your website. In that same study that we showed you earlier, it was listed as the second most important place for information. And it's important that your website is both coherent and succinct, as well as being current, and that it matches what you said in your application, which you, of course, have come from your case for support. Your website should be easy to navigate. Information should be easy to find. How it should reflect the case for support. In the About section, of course, the history, why you exist, the mission and vision statements, your objectives as an organization, what your key programs and projects are, what value you are to the community is really a way of speaking in terms of speaking to both the public and knowing that the foundations are looking at you as well. You want to speak about your benefits of what you're doing, your outcomes, in other words, who your board is and who your management is, any audited financial statements, particularly the most recent ones, your 990s in the U.S. or any of your tax forms in Canada or any other countries that might be listening, and actual links to those, what your privacy policies are, what your governance policies are, and how your stewardship around gifts as well. As well as, of course, common things like address and contact information. So I hope that today's overall has been really helpful to you. We did, in fact, end up going over 6 minutes. But I think we were able to give you a clear presentation of all the elements of the case for support, and that you can use this evaluator that we use today, both in your ability to actually do all aspects of the case for support, as well as to go back and check that you're creating a strong one, and that each year the case for support should be readdressed, and you can use the evaluator again there. One aspect of the case for support that we'll be going into more deeply, because within an hour we just don't have time to dig deeply into all of it. So the increasing foundation grants by demonstrating the value of your programs, this is where we'll spend the whole hour talking about outcomes and how to present outcomes in a way that is powerful and compelling. Then we will, our next webinar is about all the steps of the foundation fundraising program process and how to succeed at each of those, and then the keys to successful grant writing. And we hope that you will join us for one or more of those webinars. We'd like to move on now into the question and answer period. We will do our best to remove duplicate questions, but I'm just simply looking here and just reading out loud the question and answering the best I can. If there are any questions that are not answered today because we run out of time, last time we had over 70 questions. I don't actually know how many we have today, but if they are not answered straight away in this webinar, we will answer them and have that answer for you in the materials that we send you afterwards. So I'm going to take a second here to take a quick sip of water, and then we'll get going on the questions. Okay, so the first question is, will we get a copy of the slides? Yes. Will we have, always have included the case report with the application and have some success? I have not sure why not to include it. You're going to include aspects of the case for support in your applications. So your proposal is all that you need. Filling out your proposal is all that you need to do. So it's not so much that you're including and not including your case for support. Your case for support aspects of it become your proposal. So So there's, I guess that's all I can say to that question. Could you please explain what you mean by strategic management on the case for support evaluator? Yes, strategic management basically is the strategy that your organization has in place in terms of resource allocation and how you're going to go about your implementation and so forth. So just being able to present to, in your case, where you're going as an organization, so, and how you're managing that process. How do you utilize your the outcomes and the results that you get from your to make changes and drive your organization? Next, can the case for support process be used for a subdivision of an organization like a college within a university that needs funding for projects? Absolutely, and I would recommend that you do that actually. So you can be using the case for support for the organization overall, but you can also use it for individual projects within that organization. How often should one update the case for support given the number of foundations that need to be approached to secure funding for programs 6 months, once a year? I think part of what this person is speaking to is what we talked about right at the beginning, a concern around resources, time, and so forth. And my recommendation is to go fully through a case for support process. When you take a new position as a fundraiser, and to do it once a year if you've been in that organization for each of those years. And then in terms of managing your time around fundraising, I think you'll find that the case for support process, even though it does take time, will actually help you be much more effective and efficient. Next question. In general, how long should a case for support be? Well, it depends on how many programs you have to write about and talk about. I've seen case for supports being anywhere from 5 pages to being 50 pages. It really depends on how large your organization and how many aspects that you need to talk about. I say be thorough. This is an internal document. It doesn't, in a way, it doesn't matter how long it is. You're going to do an executive summary that's going to be helpful for some of the stakeholders who don't want to read all the way through it. But it is a collection of information that you're going to use for everything else. So, why not be thorough? How does one measure and message the outcome of programs that teach the teacher or provide more administrative support to direct service providers? Again, one of the points I made earlier was if you look at your programs as an experiment, this is your supposition of how to solve a specific problem, then you're going to look to what would show you, what would be the indicators, the markers of success at solving that problem. So if your program is to teach teachers, then clearly you see that there's some gap in knowledge or some way that teachers need to be served. What would indicate to you that they are being served? Would it be increase in education? Would it be higher scores for their students down the line? Would it be the number of programs that they are able to then implement in their own schools as a support for the effect that your program has had on them? Next question, who actually prepares the case for support? I would say that it's usually the Director of Development is the driving force behind, or the VP of Advancement is the driving force behind the case for support. But it needs input from almost every single department within the organization. It is sometimes, if you don't have the skill set for somebody to facilitate a process like that within your organization, it is worth bringing in a freelancer or a consultant. 2 questions is the next one. Are there other samples of case for support, and generally speaking, how long? Okay, so how long we already answered. Are there other samples of case for support? We will go into more samples in our next one. We can only fit so many into a 1-hour webinar. Can you repeat the point about the characteristics? So characteristics are features of something as opposed to how those features benefit or impact the person. Let me use a really kind of silly example of the difference between a feature and a benefit. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. The feature of it is that it's black and that it's a t-shirt. The benefit of it is that it's cool and it's comfortable. So I hope that helps you understand the difference between a characteristic, even though it's a silly example, a difference between a characteristic and a benefit. I would like to see examples of these cases as they relate to much smaller organizations that only have 3 or 6 people in the community-based organization who do not have the huge resources or funding available to them as the examples used. The one example that I used about statement of need, I kind of did that all on my own just by doing research on the internet, so it doesn't require a lot of resources to be able to do that. I would also recommend, again, that you go to your local college or university and go to the department that's appropriate for your organization and find an academic who would be interested in helping your organization and finding a subject or an area of study. Also, they probably exist somewhere, somebody who's done a program that's similar to yours. Contact them, find out if they're doing outcome measurements, and utilize those as examples of the kinds of outcomes you may have given the programs that you're implementing that are similar. Is expanding our guide star profile important? Yes, I think GuideStar in the survey that the Hope Consulting did, I don't have it right in front of me, but I believe GuideStar was the number 3 or the number 4 source of information about an organization. So yes, it can be very helpful. If an organization's website is the second most important place for information, what is the most important? The application that you've actually sent the granting body itself is the most important, or the one that they look at the most. Is there a Canadian equivalent to the 990? Yes, it's just the your not-for-profit submission for your. I'm sorry, I didn't just mention that in the webinar. We of course are speaking both to Canadians and Americans today. Will any of the upcoming webinars be in the series address the components of effective websites in more detail? Yes, we're going to be talking in the next one about outcomes, and we're also going to talk about presentation of outcomes, and we'll touch on your website in that way. But we're not doing one specifically on websites. Maybe we should. Thanks for the input. Next question, should we develop a case for support annually? I think I answered this. So develop one and then develop every time you go to a new organization as a development person. And then once you're in the organization and you've done that, then visit it annually. Do all the covered points apply equally to outside consultants? I think issues like mission statement would be the responsibility of the customer and not-for-profit organization. I can't agree more. I don't know what you mean. I'm sorry, I don't know what you mean by how this applies to a consultant. A consultant will be helping an organization develop these, I imagine. And if you are working with an organization on a case for support and they don't have a strong documentation of, as we talked about, mission, vision, all of that, then I would say it was part of the consultant's job in helping them with the case of support to actually facilitate a process by which they would actually come to a better documentation of this type. Let me express my sincere thanks. Oh, thank you. You're welcome. I'm just reading everything. Sorry if I just sort of not noticed until I get. How can research think tank organization use this process? That's a good question. I think the same process. If you're applying for funds, then you too have a similar program that you can take through, an organization that you can take through the similar process that you've done now. Your think tank came about, it came into existence because you felt that there was some kind of gap in information or gap in observation or study or thinking. So that becomes your statement of need. Is this gap or what you feel is an important aspect? I was speaking to a Canadian magazine called, I won't say what it's called, I'll just say what it's about. It's about long-form journalism, and they are an issues-oriented magazine, and really what they exist to do is create a forum for dialogue around political issues in Canada. So in some ways, some similarities, I think, in some of the similar challenges that you're thinking of in terms of applying for funds. So, when we were brainstorming about their fundraising process, what I noticed was two things. Was A, they were too busy being a magazine to understand that they were also a not-for-profit organization. So the person who asked this question about the think tank, I would ask you, are you too busy being a think tank to think about the fact that you are also a not-for-profit organization? And then the second part of what we were brainstorming about, as I said to them, well, why does a forum for political discussion need to exist in this country? It was a Canadian magazine, and we're in Canada. And we talked about, what happens in communities where there isn't a forum for this kind of discussion. Do we end up in totalitarian situations? Do we end up in, difficult? Does it actually destroy communities? Does it destroy societies when there isn't a place for the citizens of a country to discuss openly and with freedom, you know, about these kinds of issues. And of course that's the case. So that becomes the statement of need for an organization like that. Is this need in order to protect the freedom of a culture for political discussion? So I hope that that helps you, the person who asked the think tank question, understand how you would go about the foundation of the case for support for yourself is what is that need within our society for what it is that you as an organization are thinking about. Next question, who would you go over what you mean? What would you go over what you mean by stewardship? Yes, stewardship is the stewarding of the support that you received. So once you have received a grant or a gift of any kind to the organization, how do you acknowledge the donor? What is the donor invited to, invited into? How is that donor part of the process of the organization? You know, what are you doing in terms of reporting back to it? How are you strategizing going back to them and asking them for more gifts? These are the kinds of things that you would be doing under the rubric of stewardship. Next question. Do most foundations require a full audit of agency finances, and if so, how often? What is the difference between a full audit and a financial review, and will the latter sometimes suffice? Most foundations prefer third-party audited finances by you know, a fully competent auditor. You can submit budgets, but in submitting your financials, it's much better if they are audited. It's just stronger for you if you cannot do it at this time. You know, do your best that you can with it, but move as soon as you can to fully audited financials. We are a community college foundation. How much information, percentage-wise, do I include on our foundation versus the college itself, and how about the organization budget? They should be a place for the entire budget of the college. Sorry, the person just flicked past that question, and now I need to break it down. Oh, we lost it. Okay, not to worry. I'll come back to it and I'll answer it. Oh, here we are. Yeah, we found it again. Okay, so you should have a overall for the community college what the budget is. These are going to be just top lines, right? You're not going to go into detailed budget. Look at the foundation as almost like you would a program or a division. You're going to have your divisions budget, and then there, as a college, you're obviously raising money specifically for aspects of the college itself, and you're going to have the budgets of those. So you're going to drill down into the overall budget of the college. Those top lines, that should be included, but you're going to drill down where you need to based on what it is that you're actually applying for grant money for. I hope that answers your question. Do you recommend for how, do you have recommendations for how to present a convincing argument that the program or intervention you propose will address the problems and community needs in your state, in your needs segment? Do you have recommendation on how to present convincing argument? Yeah, I think the way to present it is statistically based, is to do the research on the problem that you're trying to solve, find out what the trends are, what would happen if the problem, if there was no intervention, and use that as the jump-off point for discussing the need within the community. A consultant has quoted us $25,000 to develop a case for support. Does this seem reasonable? I don't know how to answer that question because I'm not looking at what they've proposed to you. I would say that costs vary across the U.S., across Canada. Different regions have consultants suggest different amounts. You know, I think I'm going to avoid answering that question. I don't know. I don't know what to say to you on that.
Next question. I understand that the case for support is a tool to convince stakeholders to support ideas and organizations. How does a case for support differ from a well-articulated strategic plan? They will be strategic plans within the case for support in terms of presenting how you're planning on implementing it. But the strategic plan is really your steps you're going to take to actually your action plan, if you will. Whereas the case for support is really about answering all of those kinds of questions about who you are, what you do, and why you're doing it. So I would say that's the distinction. We are a multi-service human services organization with several programs. Do you recommend we have a case for support for each program and/or one for our organization overall? So you have a case for support for your organization overall, and within that overall case for support is listed each of your programs. There's a statement of need for the whole organization. There are outcomes for the whole organization, and then there is a statement of need for every single program. There is the outcomes for every single program. So you're always working on that macro and the micro level, but it all goes into one document for the case for support for your organization. If our organization has been around for a long time, has been somewhat sloppy, but has new management and changing dramatically, how do you form a case for support at the point that is strong? I would say do a case for support now, and part of what you're going to do under the capacity area, under the strategic management area, is articulate how you're making the changes to your organization that are going to lead to stronger outcomes. Better service, all the ways that you're trying to clean things up. So I think I can answer a couple more questions, and I'm going to have to answer the rest of them by email. I understand that the case for support is a tool to convince stakeholders to. Oh no, we did that one already. Sorry. I work for a food bank. We distribute food to partner agencies that we have more direct contact with, but we have that have more direct contact with clients than the food bank does. We measure outputs all the time, pounds distributed, etc. It can be difficult for us to highlight outcomes. Any suggestions? What is the impact on the whole area of food distribution to those who don't have it by what it is that you do? So you may not be the organization that directly gives to the people who are actually needing the food, but you are impacting the whole chain, and you're impacting that whole community around that. So that's one area that you want to talk about. What value do you bring to that chain of events that happens that gets the food to the actual end user? What would happen if you weren't in that process? How would that be affected? These are the ways you can if you answer those questions, I think you'll find your outputs there. Also, maybe you have a unique or a fresh way of approaching distribution of food that makes it easier. You're impacting those organizations, and they're impacting the end user. So how you measure outcomes can also be how what you do impacts the organizations that you're distributing to, if you see what I mean. So look for the value at that stage, as well as talking about how that value impacts overall food distribution. Actually, we've only got a couple more questions, so we're going to try and answer them here. When in the development of a not-for-profit does the case for support become a critical process? Given only small volunteers board and no staff. Well, I just did a process like this for a small organization with no staff, and we did the process over 3 days with the board and a few key volunteers. And it was galvanizing for everybody involved. Everybody was very excited. They felt more purposeful they felt that they could go out and do the fundraising in a much more powerful way. So my suggestion for a small group like that is for the one administrator to gather all the information together and then to facilitate a process over a couple of day retreat, which can just be, the retreat can just be in your offices, just turn off all the phones and lock the door and go to it. And then the last question is, what is the GuideStar profile? My suggestion to you is that you Google GuideStar. GuideStar is an American organization. It's where the IRS lists all not-for-profit organizations. And then you have an opportunity to expand the profile beyond just the listing. So Google GuideStar, have a look at what they do and the services they offer. So we've answered all the questions. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you, Shadi, for answering all these questions, and to the audience for asking. Please note that you will receive a copy of today's webinar's recording.